Welcome everyone to this evening's webinar, Retrofit Journey for Householders. I'm delighted to have our expert speaker, Adam Whitworth from People Powered Retrofit, presenting on the subject this evening. So I'm Tina Holt, I'm doing the welcome and the introduction. Then Adam will take over to talk about the Retrofit Journey for Householders. At about 10 to 7 o'clock, we'll open up for the question and answer session. So do put your questions to us in the Q&A and we'll go through them and hopefully have some answers for you. Towards 20 past 7, we'll move on to have the second poll and talk about next events and follow-up information, and then we'll hope to close on promptly at 7:30. So for those who don't know already, I'll just say a little bit about Cumbria Action for Sustainability. Our vision is a zero carbon Cumbria, and we have many projects that hopefully will work towards that target, not just retrofit of homes, but on all sorts of different things, community projects, working with businesses, working with individuals in different ways. And we're also the co-chair of the Zero Carbon Cumbria Partnership. So if you don't know that much about CAFS, do go onto our website and do have a look. One of the other things I'd just like to mention is that we run carbon literacy courses, and it's a one-day course split over 2 days so that you've got 2 half-day sessions online. It's all about climate change science, the causes, the impacts, and importantly, the solutions. And I'd say if you're interested in knowing more, do go onto our website and have a look. You can book a place on the next course on the 22nd of June. And if you're an organisation who where you think maybe several people would be interested in joining, then we can do bespoke ones in-house for organisations and communities. Then moving on to energy services, I work on the energy services team within CAFS, and we have a range of things that we can help people with. On the free side, we have energy efficiency advice calls and visits. For people who are eligible, we can give a short general advice phone call, and we can do a free retrofit consultation if you're interested in knowing more about our retrofit advice. So the retrofit advice that we offer, we call it Home Retrofit Planner. It's an energy model with a report, and that's our main energy advice sort of tool that we use. But we also do thermal imaging and other kinds of energy advice. And of course, we run these courses and webinars, which are sometimes free, sometimes paid for. So thank you to those of you who have donated when you booked onto the course. That really helps us. And this week, it helps us even more than usual because we launched a goal. We launched a challenge to raise £10,000 for CAFS as part of the Earth Day. And actually, we've already reached our target of £10,000. And the brilliant thing about this donating in this week is that your donation gets doubled. So if anyone does wish to make a donation to CAFS, we'd be absolutely delighted. That's the link there, the CAFS Big Give, and it's just brilliant and really helpful for those of you who've already done so. So Adam is the supply chain manager for People Powered Retrofit in Manchester. He joined the construction industry in 2018 and studied at the Centre for Alternative Technology, and has really got interested in sustainable and low carbon building from there. Been working with People Powered Retrofit for about 1.5 years now, and is working on the contractor and tradespeople side, finding the people who are doing the work for the clients in Manchester who are undertaking their retrofits. So that's a quick introduction to you, Adam, and I'm going to hand over to you now. So I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Tina. That's great. And it's lovely to be here with you again. I'm going to share my screen now. Have you got that? Oh, I think you're muted. Can you see that, Tina? Yeah, brilliant. Great. Yeah, lovely to be here. I have done this presentation once before, and it's lovely to be back again. So thanks for having me, Tina. We're going to talk, as you know, about the retrofit journey for householders. We'll break the process down into various stages, and there'll be a Q&A session at the end, so do please add questions into the Q&A box as you think of them, and then Tina can collate them and curate them, and we can deal with them all in one go at the end. And slides will be made available, as Tina said. There are a few links in there. I'll open a few, but I perhaps won't open them all, so you'll be able to go back in your own time and have a quick look if you wish afterwards. So we'll start, for those of you who are very new to it, what is retrofit? So the term retrofit could really be anything that's retrospectively fitted into a building. So it could be a skylight going into an existing roof. It could be a new heating system. What we're really talking about, though, in this context is green retrofit, or you might hear it described as eco retrofit, low carbon retrofit, but generally in the industry it's just retrofit now. So that's the installation of insulation, energy efficient heating systems. It could be smart heating control technology. It could be solar panels or anything else that's designed to reduce the impact of your home, whilst also making it a healthier and more comfortable environment to be in. So retrofit can, of course, make a big difference to household bills. I've just included a couple of quotes on here from a client of ours who's had some work done some years ago. So it's not just about the numbers. You can make big savings on energy bills and household energy use, but it's important also to say that there can be a real qualitative difference to the occupant's sense of comfort in a home that's been retrofitted. A successful retrofit should reduce the temperature peaks and troughs that you experience in the house, and it should cut out the drafts. And it's important to think about that because, well, if you turn the heating off and the temperature drops quickly, that's what makes you feel cold. If your peaks and troughs are ironed out, then you don't get that same sense of being cold. So yeah, it's the drafts and the changes in temperature that we're sensitive to that make us feel cold rather than the absolute temperature. And retrofit can really help to address that, as well as the absolute numbers. So the focus of the session is making changes to the property to make significant improvements to the energy efficiency and the thermal efficiency of the building. We're looking at the house as a whole system, and much of the work we're looking at significant improvements. We're aiming for significant improvements, so much of that work isn't something that can easily be done as DIY, because it can be quite complex, and it's important to ensure that the design and the implementation is correctly detailed and that the risks of the work are managed. That's not to say, though, that all possible measures have to be undertaken, or that all the work you might like to do has to be undertaken in one go. It might just be that some people want to do a single measure for the moment. Perhaps you've got a drafty suspended floor that you want to deal with as a first priority. But nevertheless, it's still important to think about the work you're planning to do in the context of the whole building, and in the context of other things that you might want to do later, or the next owner might want to do, and thinking about the impacts of the work you're going to do in relation to the house as a system. And also to think about the materials and the methods that you might employ. You need to make sure what you're doing is safe and appropriate for the building. And that's, again, about managing risks and to ensure that the changes are effective in helping you to achieve what you want to, whatever your retrofit goals might be. So as it mentioned on the previous slide, retrofit, effectively, it's just construction work of a form, and commissioning retrofit work generally involves the same stages as any other construction work that you might do. So if, for example, you're thinking about just having your living room replastered, there'd be some basic stages that you have to go through to get that work done. So you might notice that the wall looks tired and you think it's time to refresh it, and then you'll go on to make a bit of a plan. You'll have to look at the state of the plaster, look at the details, any alcoves, any complications. And then you'll get a contractor in, they'll have a look, they'll do some thinking, they'll specify the materials, come up with a plan, perhaps give you a quote, hopefully, and then the work gets done, and then afterwards there'll be a bit of a debrief where you might have a chat with the contractor. They'll give you some pointers on when you can start to use the room again, how long you need to ventilate it for, and so on, when to redecorate. So that the process is broadly the same for small works such as that, or for larger works if you're having an extension done or a retrofit project. So the stages we're going to look at are loosely based really on wider, I'll start again, sorry. There's not necessarily just one way to stage a retrofit. All homes are different and all jobs are unique, but they'll all involve similar sort of core stages. But there might be a varying degree of depth and detail required depending on the nature and the complexity of the work you'd like to do. The stages are loosely based on the REBA plan of work and the PAS 2035 framework. So they're informed by and fit within a wider context of construction industry practice and regulation. And for anyone that doesn't know those terms, so REBA is the Royal Institute of British Architects, and the plan of works is their definitive model for the design and construction of buildings. And PAS 2035, PAS is an acronym for Publicly Available Standard. And that particular standard is a specification for whole house or whole building retrofit. In some cases, if you're, for example, in social housing or publicly funded work, public building retrofit, there's a requirement to follow this process and to document the process at various stages. There's all sorts of paperwork that needs to be filed and documented. For privately funded work on your own home, there isn't actually any requirement to follow that process, but nevertheless, it's a really good idea to be aware of it and to think about following it loosely, just because you want to minimize the risks and ensure that the work that you're doing does everything you want it to do. I'm not going to click through to these links, but do have a little look. The PAS 2035 is really interesting, particularly when we're talking about retrofit, because obviously it's focused on retrofit. So do have a look at the slides afterwards and have a little look at that process. Right, let's have a look at the stages. So first one, starting out, before you make any decisions, have a think and get some initial advice. So this first stage involves creating a project brief, assessing pros and cons of doing the work all at once, or perhaps taking a phased approach. That might depend on your appetite for the disruption. It might depend on your budget and having a sort of a flow. You might think, I can afford to do something this year and something next year. And also at this point, just getting some ideas and building some knowledge around retrofit to make decisions, appropriate decisions for your property. So retrofit project brief is the first part. Now, if you're using a service such as CAFS or People Powered Retrofit, this is something that they will work with you to develop. And I'll show you an example in a moment of a template that we might use. But if any of you would like to just write in the chat now, just to give us an idea of your own motivations around why you're interested in retrofit, why you want to retrofit your home, then do write a few words just to give us a sense of what's going on. We'll come back to that in a moment, and Tina will read out a little bit just to give us all an idea of what people might be thinking. So with some trepidation, I'm going to click this link because last time I did this presentation, my computer crashed, but I think we're okay. So retrofit project brief, as I say, in our service in CAFS, we do this via a phone call at the beginning of when people enter the service, just to get initial details, personal details about the people in the house, household details, who's living in it, any health conditions. If you're asthmatics in the house, that can be important in terms of air quality. If you've got any other plans, you might be thinking you want to build an extension at some point. It's important to factor that in if you've got other works in the offing. partly because it just makes sense to have it all, the work done at once, and also in terms of planning. You don't want to be doing some work and then having to undo it later if you've got other things planned. Any idea of timescales, your priorities. It might be any features you don't want to disturb, or internal plaster work and that kind of thing if you've got feature plaster work in an old building. Logistics important, budget of course important as well. Yeah, general property information, your heating services and so on. As quite often in retrofit you might be thinking about upgrading your heating system or changing away from gas. If not now, then perhaps in the future. Listings, flooding, all sorts of information that will help to develop your ideas. Have we got any interesting thoughts in the chat?
Yes, we've got all sorts. We've got a lot of similar ideas as well. So we've got people wanting for warmer, lower carbon, lower bills. Lots of carbon reduction, less damage to the planet, making rooms feel warmer, reducing energy consumption, climate finance and the novelty of living in a warm house, join the club, reducing energy demand. So yes, it's carbon, it's costs, reducing mold problems. So that's a really useful one to add in there. That's reduce energy consumption, emissions, comfort. So if you're off the gas grid, then that's even more challenging perhaps to make your house comfortable and low carbon. Moving to cheaper options. So it's the full range. Yeah,
brilliant. Great. That's all the sort of things we'd expect. Great. That's great to hear. Thank you. Thanks for those who've put their ideas in there and motivations. So at this early stage, something that's really useful through the whole process, and we'll come back to later on, is baselining. So in order to later understand the effectiveness of the work, you need to understand where you're starting off from. And this will be guided by your motivations to a degree. If your priority is to improve comfort, then you might want to start monitoring the temperatures and humidity levels in the house. If emissions and bills is your motivation, then start making some records so you've got something to compare to later on. Or it could be, as some of the people have just mentioned, it could be more qualitative. It might be about how you feel in your home. It might be there are certain rooms that people just don't feel comfortable in. You want to make them more cozy and more attractive. In which case, note those down at the beginning, just so you know how you feel about it, so that when you come back to it later on, you can make a comparison once the work's complete. Also useful at this point, start thinking about who you might need on the project team. And again, if you've got a service like CAFs or PPR involved, you can get advice on that. It's important to say, this looks like a bit of a big scary list of titles and so on. You might not need all of these people involved, but it's important to think at this point, it depends really on the house and the scope of this and the scale of the project. Just start having a think about it now, and where you might find those people. Okay, so we've got the brief. Time to focus it in a bit really and create a plan. So everything you've outlined about your motivations, your priorities, your budget, your plans and timescales, all that will help you to tailor this plan to you and your home. The first important step really is assessing the home. We'll come back to it in a moment, but you'll be doing a retrofit survey. A thorough survey will help you to understand where the big improvements might lie. Also, importantly, it might identify any repair work that you might need to do before thinking about retrofit, or any other issues you might need to think about before tackling energy efficiency improvements. We'll come back to that in a second. So your whole house plan, it'll think about a number of areas really. So your comfort in the home, really important when doing retrofit work to think about ventilation as well, particularly in old buildings where you might have, they've sort of relied on draughts for ventilation, unplanned ventilation. Thinking about air quality and ventilation post retrofit is important. Thinking about maintenance needs, it might be that you've got a broken gutter that's leaking water down your walls. You need to get that sort of thing done before you're thinking about insulating those walls. Aesthetics of your home, I mentioned before, there might be historic features inside the house you want to retain that might limit what you can do on certain walls and so on. Or it might be that you've got an obligation. If you've got a listed building, you might have to preserve certain features. And also, it's not quite retrofit, but it's also interesting to think about energy use of your appliances. If you've got a 30-year-old fridge, it might be time to think while you're doing this, while you're thinking about energy, to perhaps update some of your appliances, because the modern ones can be an awful lot more efficient as well. So while you're doing this work and thinking about energy, might be a perfect opportunity. So the approach that we advocate at People Powered Retrofit is what's known as fabric first. So what that means is, before you think about putting a new heating system in, before you put solar panels on your roof, the first thing to consider is the fabric of the building. So the walls, the floors, the ceilings, that's really important. That's where the heat that you're paying, you're paying your gas bills, your electricity bills, generating this heat. If you've got leaky old walls, uninsulated walls, leaky floors, whatever, it's just dissipating out again. So that's the most important thing to do. And there are benefits really to thinking about it this way around. It'll make your house more comfortable and easier to keep warm. It'll protect the building fabric, and it might reduce the need for maintenance if you're putting external wall insulation on. Fabric first, it works and it's reliable. And also it's going to reduce your heating demand. So if you're thinking in the future, you might put an air source heat pump in, for example. If your heat demand is lower, you might be able to put a smaller heat pump in than you would otherwise have to do if you haven't retrofitted. So that will mean perhaps less capital cost on the heat pump, less embodied energy in manufacturing that heat pump, and lower running costs of that heat pump over its lifetime. And then, of course, if you replace that 15 years down the line, you get all those benefits over again. So, yeah. And so fabric first, it helps to reduce your overall energy demand and also your peak demand. And for anyone that isn't sure what that term means, it's the peak demand is the maximum demand, energy demand in your house. So that might be in the middle of winter when it's freezing cold. Over Christmas, all the family are home. You've got 3 people in the showers around the house. The oven's on. That's your peak demand, and it's reducing the peak demand as well as the overall energy demand. So you want your equipment and your house to be able to operate at peak demand. So when you're sizing heating systems and so on, it's got to be sized to cope with the peak demand. So reducing that peak demand is important as well as the overall energy demand. But the key concept here is really reduce the amount of energy that's lost through the fabric of the building before installing more energy efficient ways of putting that energy into the building. So retrofit assessments. This is a generic term really for a survey, an assessment of your home that will help you to identify potential measures and help you to decide which measures and improvements to adopt. They can be based on energy models to give quantifiable recommendations, or they might be based more on the skill and knowledge of an assessor. So there are different ways, but what we would say is that the more detailed and the more quantitative the assessment, the more accurate the results are likely to be. So just going through this list here, EPC is the one at the top. That is one that most people will probably be familiar with. If you've ever looked at estate agent brochures or bought a house, this ABCD, we all, that's rather like consumer goods. That's the government mandated energy performance certificate that stands for. So every property that's sold has to have one of those. We wouldn't recommend that you base your retrofit on this. It's based on something called reduced SAP, RD SAP. So it's not hugely detailed in the analysis. And in our experience, they're quite often full of errors. They're not not all that well done quite often. So we wouldn't recommend that. You could have a house condition survey. That's something that a surveyor, someone who you might, when you're buying a house, you might engage a surveyor to go and do a survey, and you can get various levels of survey. You could engage a surveyor to go and have a look round and give you a report. You could get a retrofit survey, rather like Tina mentioned about thermal imaging surveys. There are people that will come and do thermal imaging surveys to understand where your heat loss is, where the heat's escaping. Or you can do more detailed home retrofit assessment. So the one that Tina mentioned previously, the one that CAFs offer, is the same as the one that People Powered Retrofit also offer. It's called Home Retrofit Planner. That's actually based on full SAP, which is, we mentioned RD SAP, reduced SAP a minute ago. Full SAP is a much more detailed energy assessment, much more powerful. And Home Retrofit Planner is based on full SAP, but it's got different assumptions and it goes into a bit more detail. So it's a really great tool. There are others though. PHPP, that stands for Passive House Planning Package. That's come out of Germany, and it's, as you'd imagine, that's what's used to design passive houses. It goes into great detail about all sorts of things, the location of windows, and great detail. In terms of, when I mentioned the windows, that's to do with like heat that can be absorbed from the sun and so on, and the orientation of the house. Real great depth. And there are other models available based on full SAP as well. So a range out there, but we would say do get the more detailed, the better, really, in terms of what you can get out of it. So after you've had your assessment, we need to generate a scope of works. So this will set out the measures that you want to adopt, and you might want to take some advice on this. As I mentioned, CAFs or People Powered Retrofit will give advice and guidance on doing this, or if you're doing it independently, you might feel confident just to go it alone and make these decisions yourself. The document needs to contain various bits of information. So start thinking about the key risks, how any measures you'd like to adopt will interact with each other, any preparatory work. I mentioned about the gutters previously. You might have some damp somewhere. You might need to commission a survey to understand why you've got that damp, where that's coming from, and also start to identify any design requirements. So you might start thinking at this point, well, I'm going to need an architect for a certain part of it, or other consultants and professionals. And planning permission as well. It'll start to identify if you might need planning permission for any of the work that's going to be undertaken. Okay, so just a quick reminder at this point, if there are any questions, do pop them into the Q&A box, and we'll move on. So design and contracting. You've got your plan of the improvements you'd like to make to the home. And sadly, you can't just hand this to a builder at this stage and ask them to get on with it. You'll probably need to start taking some advice here from various consultants, perhaps designers, engineers. You might talk to some contractors for some early advice, perhaps some suppliers. The advice you're going to need at this point will depend on the nature and the complexity of the work that you're planning to do. So this step's really about commissioning that detailed design and advice, and working towards getting a full description of the work that you want to do. So that full description is really important, because that will in turn inform another document called the Schedule of Works, which the contractors can then use to fully understand what you're trying to achieve, fully understand the specification, and then they can look at it and price it up with confidence. There are a couple of ways that you can commission design work. Some measures you could have a design and build contract. So the example on here, if you're installing solar PV panels on your roof, you can probably just go to that company that's the installer and tell them what you want. They'll come along, they'll measure up your roof, they'll work out how they're going to do it, and they'll just do the job. They'll probably be following manufacturer's standard details rather than having a bespoke design, and as a result you're not paying extra designs and such, so it's a less expensive way of doing it. However, for more detailed and complex work, it's likely to involve a designer. It might be an architect, or it could be a retrofit coordinator. It really depends what you want to do, but you probably will need to involve someone more with real experience and knowledge in the area to do the design. Yes, so again, be thinking about interaction between measures, considering risks. I keep talking about risks. It's important to consider them all the way through the process, because if you're spending all this money doing the work, you want to make sure you're doing it right. You might already have a designer on hand if you're going through planning permission, if you've got a need for planning permission, and of course it is a little bit more costly having extra designers involved, but the design stage is really important. You're setting up the whole project at the design stage. So if you're skimping at the design stage, then you're potentially going to create bigger problems for yourself down the road. So it's really important to get the best advice and think about design. Take it really seriously. Excuse me. So if you are getting planning, design will probably be a two-stage process. So you'll have the high-level design to secure the planning permission. So that might be if you're having, for example, external wall insulation. In some areas, planning authorities vary. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. But if you, for example, if you're having external wall insulation and you need planning, you'll have to submit location plans, various plans of the house, floor plans and so on, really just to give the planners an understanding of what you're planning to do, any changes to the building facades and so on. And then assuming you get that planning, then you move on to the next stage. So that would be the more detailed technical design. So that's when we start to think about the materials that you might use, the methods required, and that then can inform the schedule of works that I mentioned a moment ago. And as part of this technical design process, really important again, there'll be a risk register created at this point as well. So just as it sounds, that's when you want to log potential risks that could have a negative impact on the project. And then once you've logged them and identified them, then they can be analysed for their probability, and then prioritised, and then a plan can be put in place to mitigate the risks and to limit particularly those with the greatest potential first. And then the last but crucial part of that risk process is to, at some point in the process, you need to allocate each risk to an individual. You need to give ownership of that risk to somebody involved in the project, so that someone's keeping an eye on that and making sure that that risk is mitigated, and then hopefully we'll have good outcomes and the projects will perform as designed. Great, so we know what we're doing now. Next stage, we need to find the contractor. There are a couple of ways to do this. Again, it depends a bit on the size of the job, how many measures you're doing, and what your plans are. You could have a lead or a main contractor, and then they will effectively project manage. And if there are subcontractors, they'll coordinate the subcontractors, and they'll make sure that people are there when they need to be at certain points and so on. The alternative is you might just have several contractors doing different bits of the work. So you might have a contractor doing some wall insulation and someone else insulating your floor, for example. If you want to go down that route, just keep in mind then you'll need to think about somebody has to coordinate the works. So that could be yourself. If you've got the confidence and the knowledge to do that, you might need to think about taking on a project manager or perhaps a retrofit coordinator otherwise, but just keep that in mind, because you need to make sure for things to flow well on site, you need to make sure that people are there when they need to be, and so on. And even in terms of, you might need building inspectors there. If there's a main contractor, they'll be liaising with them and making sure they're there when they need to be to sign various things off. That's just important to keep in mind. Contractors come in different shapes and sizes. There are sole traders, small family firms, larger contractors. There isn't really a right or wrong, but do try and get several quotes in order to get a full and get an understanding of. There can be a big variation in costs depending on different contractors coming in. So don't necessarily just go for the first person that you have a quote from. So when you're looking to choose a contractor, you might have to talk to a few to find the right one for you. There are a few specialist retrofit contractors out there now, but retrofit as an industry is still relatively in its infancy in the construction industry. So you might not live near one, you might not be able to find one. They're in high demand as well. So don't despair, because most of the work involved isn't completely different to construction work. A decent traditional builder should be able to do this work. They should be reasonably familiar with the processes. They should be able to achieve this work. So if you've had a builder before that you are happy with, then probably a good place to start is to have a chat with them. Talk to them about what you're planning to do. You've got your schedule of works document. That should give you a really good outline of the job. Show that to them. Let them come and have a look round. If there are elements of the job that they're unfamiliar with, then it's not game over, because there are ways around it. You could perhaps get a supplier or a specialist advisor to come along and help to sort of bridge that gap if needs be. At PPR, we offer what we describe as toolbox talks. So that's for exactly this purpose. It might be an experienced contractor, it might be a retrofit coordinator, it could be a representative from a supplier or a manufacturer. They can go to site at key times and they can show the contractor exactly what they need to do. They can explain why they need to do it that way. They can highlight the risks, and then your builder can do that job. They can have confidence that they know how to do that job and they've got someone to refer to. So don't be put off if you can't find someone who's got specific experience with what you want to do. Because the reality is, at the moment, it's not always likely, and it's not always likely you'll be able to find someone that's got experience with exactly what you want to do. So, but yeah, don't despair. And if you don't know a builder, then ask around. You might have a friend who can recommend a builder to you. Have a look online. There's the Federation of Master Builders. They've got a list of accredited builders. You could try them. You could have a look on perhaps local Facebook groups, nextdoor.com, things like this, where you can have a chat and your community might be able to recommend someone. There are also review sites, but one thing I would say about those is I know certainly one, not sure if I should mention names or not, but I will. It's called Check a Trade, and I know that they don't publish the bad reviews. So you have to just be a little bit careful about some of these review sites. If they're all glowing reviews, it might not be that everyone is happy with them. So just take things with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But if you find someone you like the sound of, you get on with, ask them about training accreditations, but they're not the be all and end all either. A lot of builders might have just learnt on the job and might be great builders. Do ask for some references though, because a good builder should be very happy to provide you with some references. You might even be able to go and see some work they've done, talk to some people they've done some work for. What you really need to do is find someone that's got great attention to detail, because detail is really, really important in retrofit work, and also someone that you get on with, because remember that, like with any big, any job in your home, you might have them in your house for a few weeks, even a month or two. So make sure it's someone you get on with and they've got good attention to detail. So yeah. Contracts. So you found a builder, whoever it is you've chosen to work with, it's really important you've got a contract in place before any work begins. That way you know exactly what to expect of them. They know exactly what to expect of you. And in the event that something does go wrong, you've got some legal protection. So really important. There is, I'm not going to open this up. In fact, I'll show you quickly this. You can have a look at it in your own time. But we have got this contract comparison sheet that a contract lawyer that we work with has put together for us, called Sarah Fox. And so we sort of run through this with our clients, but we don't recommend a contract to our clients. It's for them really to decide between them and their builder. And there isn't a right or wrong answer. It can depend a little bit on the project. Smaller measures, single measure projects, you might not need a full contract. There is something that Sarah Fox has put together called the 500-word construction contract for single measures. I know that some of the retrofit contractors we work with, they use this 500-word contract, and it works quite well. Sometimes contracts can be a bit overcomplicated, but yeah, it will depend on the nature and complexity of the work, as I keep saying about a few things. But and it's also worth mentioning at this point, CAFs are running another webinar all about construction contracts on May the 19th. So please do sign up for that, and then you can be fully briefed on construction contracts.
And it's worth saying that it is Sarah Fox who is going to be our expert speaker on that one.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, great. Well, she's lovely. She's great. Okay, so we're moving on now. We're on site. We've got our contractors' work starting. So at this point, we need to be thinking really about quality assurance and creating a way to monitor and assess the standard of the work that's being carried out. So the key ingredients to controlling the quality of the retrofit work: clear information up front, reasonable expectations of your builder, regular communication, and then a strong framework for oversight. So yeah, I keep talking about risks. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it here. So there are risks involved in doing this work. They should have been identified at the design stage. They should have been logged, and then there will be plans in place to minimize them and mitigate them. And I'm a little bit more about what these risks might be. So the first risk is just that there's a performance gap. So you do your retrofit work, and then you get to the end and it's not performing, it's not giving you the energy savings and other outcomes that it was designed to do. Excuse me. Another risk could be that thermal bridges might be created in the building, which, put simply, that just means that cold spots can be created in the building where condensation can form, which can eventually lead to mold and damp. And that could be due to a gap in the insulation. I came across an example where a ceiling had been insulated, and there was a sort of a tricky bit to get to in the corner, and it'd been identified by a thermal imaging survey that this corner just hadn't been insulated, and I guess when the contractor was doing it, they just sort of couldn't get to it or whatever, and it was creating a thermal bridge and a cold spot on the ceiling where there was a damp patch. And that's just because that warm, moist air in the building, wherever the coldest patch is, that's that warm, cold air. Sorry, that warm, damp air will find that cold spot and it will condense and it can create a damp patch. Another possibility is that there might be something like a metal fixing that's through a bit of insulation, and that can just create a route for heat to be transmitted out of the building, for cold to be transmitted in, and again, it can create a cold patch. The major risk really is that moisture could be introduced and get trapped in the fabric of the building. And this can happen, for example, if there's a gap. If you're having internal wall insulation, you could have a tiny gap in the airtightness layer. And it's really surprising. I'm doing this carbon light retrofit course at the moment, and I was really surprised. It can be litres and litres of water that can get through a 1 millimetre crack that's 1 metre long. Over a period of time, litres of water can actually get through there, just in form of water vapour that can then condense in the wall, and it can lead to problems later on. You might not even notice it for a year or two, but eventually, if if that isn't rectified, or if if you've got, say, a wood fibre internal wall insulation, if that wood fibre ends up getting wet, firstly, it won't be insulating very well, and secondly, it might start to swell, and you might have to end up taking that off, and it's going to be a right pain and expensive to fix. And then, worst case scenario, you could get mold forming that you don't realise, that could then sort of get back into your house and impact your air quality. And you could even end up with moisture transmitting through into the brickwork. It condenses in the cold bricks, so the vapour gets through from the inside, condenses in the cold bricks, and you can end up with spalling and cracking of the bricks due to freeze-thaw action, which will be obviously costly to repair. So yeah, I'm only mentioning these. I don't want to put anyone off retrofit. All I'm trying to illustrate really is that quality assurance is really critical, just as a way of managing and minimising those risks. And luckily, there are a number of ways to do that, and these include these points on the slide here. So you can use a retrofit coordinator, which is part of that past 2035 framework that we mentioned. Obviously, you're under no obligation to do so, but that's one route to go. You could use a quality framework, and that might be devised by a professional such as a retrofit coordinator, or it might be, I think, the AECB, the Association for Environment Conscious Building. I think they have a retrofit checklist which will help to address and mitigate these risks. And also, with any equipment that's going in, make sure they're being properly commissioned, mechanical ventilation perhaps, or air source heat pumps. Anyone that's working on the site, really important to make sure they understand what you're trying to achieve and the importance of the detailing in these things. Because sometimes in construction, we've all heard of examples of things not being done right, and you just want to make sure that people who are working on the site understand what you want to achieve and how it needs to be done. Another thing might be site visits by either your retrofit coordinator or perhaps a surveyor if you know one, or someone that can go along, just check things out at specific times. Photos perhaps at appropriate stages. For example, if you're having nice triple glazed windows put in, before the reveals and before everything's made good, you want to just make sure that they're airtight as tape, because you really want to make sure these triple glazed windows, and any windows for that matter, are put in and they're airtight around the outside. So instead of just being put in with spray foam, which sadly many windows are just should have shoved in the wall, and there's a can of spray foam that goes around them, and that's kind of job done. But if you want to do a low energy retrofit, it needs to be better than that. And there are great things like airtightness tapes. They last for, I think they're supposed to last for 100 years or something, and they're flexible. They won't crack over time. They won't shrink over time. And before that gets covered up, you want to get someone in there. You want some photos taken, and you want someone just to be checking that that's been done to the right standard. And it's definitely worth including these requirements in the contract when you're at the beginning, just so that your builder's aware. It's not going to be a surprise to them when there's someone coming looking over their shoulder. They need to understand that that's a part of this process for a quality outcome as well. So, right, so work's done. Final phase to complete, really, and it's the key question here, I guess, is have you achieved your aims? Really important that you get a handover pack at the point that the work's finished. This should include any user manuals for equipment that's been put in, maintenance plans required for anything that's been installed, warranties, and warranties and guarantees. That could be mechanical and electrical equipment, or it could be external wall insulation system or an internal wall insulation system. Quite often you'll find that the companies that manufacture them, there's a very specific way that they have to be applied. There's sometimes several layers to these external wall insulation systems, and as long as your contractor or your subcontractor is accredited by the company, they'll get a warranty for the work, so that if something does go wrong later on, you're not footing the bill. The contractor, or the manufacturer will have to sort that out. So also, building control certificate needs to be in there if required, which it probably will be. And also, if you've got operating controls for MVHR systems, get the contractor to label them if you can, or at least make sure that you get a really thorough handover so you really understand how to operate anything that's gone in, and you can get the best out of anything that's been installed as part of the work. And then, so yeah, evaluation. Thinking back to your project brief, your motivations for getting the work done. Have you achieved what you wanted to do? If you were looking at your comfort, have a look at your original temperature and humidity readings, make a comparison to what they are now. If it was qualitative and you were thinking about certain rooms that you didn't enjoy being in, how are you thinking about them now? Are you enjoying them more? Are they feeling cozier? If it was to do with air quality, are you noticing the difference? Or of course, if it's energy usage and bills, have they gone down? I mean, you might not be able to evaluate this immediately after the work, but you know, in the year following, hopefully you'll have a year of data, perhaps that you can go back to from before the work. So in the year following, you'll really get a sense of what difference it's made. So that's really just circling back now to the baselining that we talked about at the beginning. If you've got that before and after information and data, you know, it proves that the retrofit has worked. It shows the value of your retrofit, and hopefully this won't be the case. And I hope this doesn't sound like I'm finishing on a negative, but hopefully it won't be the case. But it's better to plan for the worst. So if you've got tangible information about the before and after, then if you know there is an error, that error can be flagged. There's some information there. You can go back to the designers, go back to the contractors, and they can investigate. And if things aren't what you're expecting, hopefully they can resolve it for you as well. So I hope that you found that useful, whatever your knowledge of retrofit was coming into this. I hope there's something you've got out of it. So thank you very much, and we'll move on to some questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Adam. And that was really, really interesting, a really clear run through of the whole overarching process of retrofit. And oh, it's gone back to. So yeah, so if I think we've answered all the questions, so that's great. But if there is anything else that comes to mind, then please do get in touch with us. I did mention the other webinars, so we'll make sure that there's a link to those, possibly in the letter when we in the email when we finish off the follow-up email. But they're on the CAF's YouTube channel, so you can see previous recordings of these webinars on the CAF's YouTube channel, and obviously our future webinar, which is on the 19th of May on construction contracts. We can offer a call with an energy advisor or a retrofit call if you haven't already had a retrofit call or you haven't already had the home retrofit planner. And obviously we're doing home retrofit planner, we're booking them in now. I think we're booking in June for those at the moment. So you can get a quote for those. And if you've already had your home retrofit planner, then do get in touch if you're thinking, maybe I need some help with the next couple of steps as well. We're starting to take people through those steps now. That's an extension of our paid advice service. So those are the contact details, and to get in touch if we can help. Then just to say that's the next webinar. And also if you've got a builder, a friendly builder, a builder you've used before, a builder you're planning to use in the future, relatives or friends who are builders, joiners, plasterers, even architects, anyone in the construction trade, we're really keen to see them at our Eco Retrofit for Construction Professionals series of webinars this May and June. And we've also got a workshop on the 10th of May with a hands-on session on air tightness using tapes and membranes, and People Powered Retrofit or Carbon Co-op staff are there. They're going to be talking and joining the discussion as well. So do tell people about those. It's all on the CAF's website on the events page. Just go there to book, and yeah, get your builders along to this training, and hopefully by the time you want them to do some work, they'll have got this training under their belt. That would be great. Just I mentioned the carbon literacy course. If anyone's interested, and do pass the word on with that. June is the next one. And of course, if you want to be told about any updates, anything we're doing at CAFS, we tend to put it in our monthly newsletter. So do sign up to the newsletter. And we've got a new Facebook group, Cumbria Green Build, and that's really for householders to talk to other householders, ask questions. What builder have you used? Is it any good? Can you give me the contact details, or compare notes on what you're planning to do? Get the experiences of others. So that's really just a kind of green build forum for anyone who's doing retrofit to try and contact others who are in the same place and perhaps give each other a bit of support. So yes, so the next steps: sign up to the newsletter, join another webinar or listen to a recording. We'll send out the link we'll send out an email probably early next week with the link to the recording, with our survey. So please do our survey. It's just for our own information. It can be completely anonymous. Get in touch with us if you want some more help from us. And thank you to those of you who've donated to CAFS for any reason, or when you've booked for this this webinar. And I'd like to say a very big thank you to Adam for speaking to us this evening. It's been really helpful, and I hope we'll be seeing you again on another webinar at some point. So I'm going to close the webinar now and say good evening, and hopefully see you again. Thank you.
Thanks very much.